Seldom do we find a precise date and location for the beginning of a magical tradition, wrote Vincent Bridges and Terry Burns back in 2010 in the Ophanic Revelation. But such is the exact case with Enochian. Beginning in the mid-1580s and ending before the 1588 Spanish Armada, British intelligencers John Dee and Edward Kelly began receiving what has variously been called angelic, ophanic, or Enochian magic. They started at Dee's home outside of London in Mortlake, with Kelly nearly always serving as scryer, and Dee is the one asking questions, through Kelly, of the higher intelligences. What we call Enochian magic was the result. Enochian has been called a sacred language, artificial intelligence, and an entire magical system. It is all of these. It is also a consciousness-assisted technology that, if used correctly and with enough intentional development of your internal energy, will help you connect with higher intelligences and, most importantly, help jumpstart your internal evolution and realize that part of you that is divine and connects to the stars. It is safe to say that John Dee and Edward Kelly did not know or expect this when they started trying to talk to angels, and answers started coming through. The angels Michael, Uriel, and Semiel walked Dee and a scryer named Talbot, that many people take as Kelly, through the creation of a new protective seal, the Sigillum Dei Amen, or the seal of truth of God. Not long after, Kelly sees a whole new alphabet, the alphabet Dee most often called angelical, based on his belief that it was the language God used to create the world. Then, slowly, over the next few years, and during literally world-changing times near the end of the European Renaissance, the rest of the system comes through. As Dee, Kelly, and their families travel from England through Poland and into Bohemia to the center of the Holy Roman Empire in Rudolphine Prague, they receive and correct the rest of the system you will be learning about: the angelic calls, the holy table, the great table of earth, the table of Nalvaj. The part of Dee's diary where they actually put the system into use is missing, though his personal diary, an ephemeris really, does record a mysterious heptagonal working in Prague over several months in 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada. By 1589, Dee returned to Mortlake and Kelly remained in Bohemia, practicing alchemy and becoming a knight of the Holy Roman Empire. But if he left any magical records there, they have never been found. What was it that John Dee and Edward Kelly actually received, and why? Before we try to answer that, let's look at the simple name of the language Dee called angelical. There are multiple traditions involving angelic languages, and other cases where the angels seem to speak in existing human tongues. One thinks of the brilliant German Benedictine polymath and visionary Hildegard of Bingen, whose angelic visions were translated into music that included both Latin and terligna ignota, or unknown language. Because there are other angelic languages, what Dee called angelical is now more often referred to as Enochian, to distinguish it from those others. John Dee spent most of his life obsessed by sacred languages, and we will devote an entire lesson to exploring exactly what people have meant by a sacred language that distinguishes it from everyday writing and speech. Briefly, though, just understand that in our usage, a sacred language has letters and sounds that correspond to number and form, and corresponds to a belief system where those numbers and forms can be perfected. Think of Platonic perfect forms, Pythagorean numeric contemplation, the Tibetan Kala Chakra, the Mayan world tree, and the Hebrew tree of life. Sanskrit, Talmudic, Hebrew, ancient Mayan, and ancient Greek are among the languages some consider sacred in this particular way. The term Enochian is also used because Dee took particular interest in the biblical Book of Enoch and its namesake, although it's clear that the Book of Enoch was not written in Enochian. It is likely that it was written in Aramaic, and the entire book only exists today in Ethiopian Ge'ez. In Dee's time, there was a widespread Christian tradition of a divine language spoken by the angels that matched the sacred numbering and ordering used in the biblical creation story, much as the numbers have particular and overt meanings in Hebrew and ancient Greek. Since the antediluvian biblical patriarch Enoch was, according to most Judeo-Christian traditions, the last such man to talk directly to angels, and a man who, according to legend, walked into heaven alive, Enochian seemed to be a more precise name for the language. Some of Dee's and Kelly's angelic conversations concern Dee's inquiries about an Adamic language spoken directly from God to men. Vincent Bridges, our teacher, used the term Ophanic simply because it showed the language's connection with the Ophanim, the whirling ones or choir of angels associated with the Sephirot Chokmah and the revelation of Ezekiel, and because it was a term metaphorically packed in ways he and Terry went on to discuss in that book's introduction. But Enochian is the term most commonly used, and the one we will use here. John Dee likely had more experience exploring the connections between letters, numbers, and form than anyone else of his era. By the time he met Edward Kelly, Dee was 55 years old. He had by far the largest library in England, was an advisor to the Queen, a neighbor of her chief intelligencer, Sir Francis Walsingham, and had been the underreader in ancient Greek at Cambridge. He wowed students in Paris with his unusual mathematics and compiled and written a lost work about Hebrew grammars. In other words, he had spent much of his life exploring the relationship between sacred languages, numbers, and form. When Edward Kelly appeared at his door, it had been almost 20 years since Dee wrote the hieroglyphic monad, which Vincent Bridges called the most succinct guide to sacred geometry ever written. One could easily argue, and we have and will, that the transformations in the hieroglyphic monad and its overlap of Hermetic, Kabbalistic, Pythagorean, and ancient Greek geometric thought synthesized together by John Dee is what set the stage for the work we call Enochian. Dee was a genius at looking at different spiritual systems and finding what he needed. We'll ask you to begin developing that same facility. If you want to get an inkling of Dee's genius and obsession of synthesizing different works, simply read the hieroglyphic monad. If it was Dee's lifetime obsession with sacred languages and mathematics that set the stage for Enochian, the catalyst was the arrival of Edward Kelly. When Kelly arrives, the Enochian alphabet starts to come through. Pretty soon, they are off on a journey which neither man can control, though both try. All of this begs an important question. What is this system for? Readers who are not part of an Abrahamic religious tradition might also well ask, who is it from? As Vincent pointed out in an old series of essays, Dr. D and the ETs, D asked to talk to angels and, through Kelly and other scryers, they responded. But how are we to know they weren't talking to some other sort of higher intelligence? Any study of Enochian that invites in and borrows from spiritual and energetic practices outside of Christianity, as ours does, must take that into account. We believe, from personal experience and study, that the purpose of the system is, simply put, to give the humans who use it the opportunity to evolve much more quickly than they might without that assist. The Enochian installation that this book teaches you how to create might be best viewed as an evolutionary chamber for internal alchemy. You will need a focused, energetic practice to operate it, and we will provide instructions for that practice and explain how it interfaces with the chamber you're creating. Once you've created your Enochian installation, or temple, as we use the terms interchangeably, it will amplify and speed up other energetic practices you may already have. You will also be able to join us and others in regular Enochian energetic practice, including rituals on particular key days, usually solstices, equinoxes, and cross-quarter days, as well as occasionally other times when key stellar events are occurring. When Vincent, Terry, and the artist Darlene put together the Ophanic Revelation, it was Vincent's intent that the book not be used without instruction. Because of that, it's filled with much fascinating information, but the user is never told exactly how to set up and charge a temple. Vincent planned to do that in a subsequent book, but tragically died in 2014, the night before his play on Sir Edward Kelly was due to be performed at the Donkey and the Cradle, one of Kelly's former homes in Prague. Both of us, having studied Enochian with Vincent, having written articles based upon his understanding of it, and having taught workshops with him in the Czech Republic, and having taught other workshops based on Vincent's system in Italy and in Turkey, want to preserve and teach that system while we still can. In the years since Vincent died, we've also built upon his system in many ways. Before we go much further, we'd like to address a concern we often hear when we're teaching classes, that Enochian is dangerous or can cause the Enochian temple operator personal problems. We emphatically disagree. It's not dangerous if you know what it is and how to use it, assuming, of course, that you are willing to personally evolve and realize that this sometimes means looking at parts of ourselves that are out of balance and need to be healed. Its whole function is to help you and the planet evolve and become conscious citizens of the cosmos. As your understanding grows, sometimes those new understandings or experiences challenge old beliefs or old emotional and energetic practices, much like when a person decides to go in for therapy. Buried issues arise, and you must deal with them. That is why we place so much emphasis on daily energetic practice and path workings as you begin. Think of what happens when you run energy through a crystal. If there are flaws in the crystal and you keep increasing the amount of energy, eventually the crystal will shatter. Unlike that crystal, you can consciously work at healing yourself throughout this process. As Vincent would often say, the goal is not to stick your finger into an electric outlet and mistake the shock for enlightenment. The goal, realizable from the first day you begin, is steady progress at evolving and refining your energetic body and connecting it to the stars and the celestial consciousness that dwells among them. Sacred geometry, including that of higher dimensions, is a key part of the system. Before you begin building your Enochian installation, you need to be able to invoke a stable, energetic structure around yourself. Do not just jump to the Enochian and start with that. The system is pentagrammatic, and as we will discuss, the modern magical pentagram attributions likely come from D and Kelly. You begin with the pentagram and understand how to invoke it, understand the pentagram/pentagon as a 2D shadow of a 4D object, and stabilize those 2D shadows or standing waves with the walls of a 3D cube that can flip into a hypercube. Then you add more pentagons that self-organize into a dodecahedron. That will be the hitching post, so to speak, of your Enochian installation, and you need to know how to set it up before you start working with the letters and grids that are more obviously Enochian. The preparatory work is what Vincent called angel tech, the things you master before you start setting up Enochian furniture in your temple space. We will take you through that in detail as your first magical lessons. While you do that, you will begin doing path workings to balance out your own internal energy. This process parallels that of the alchemist, the success of whose physical alchemical processes depends on the improper internal spiritual transformation of the alchemist himself. If someone studies Enochian magic without being willing to balance out their own internal energy, especially if their intent is power over others rather than developing their own internal abilities, things may not turn out well. Their internal imbalances may reappear as issues projected outside of themselves onto others. That person should try another system. On the other hand, the people we have seen succeed the most and grow the most have been those who already had some energetic practice, be that practice Reiki, Tibetan Buddhism, creating works of art, or going on long hikes in beautiful places. If you know how to run energy or are willing to learn, and you know there is more to consciousness than three-dimensional physical reality, you will do well. The Enochian system began with Don Dee and Edward Kelly, but it didn't end there. It is a living system. We'll space some history lessons throughout this book or this course, and you can, of course, explore more on your own. But it's worth saying a word or two about modern Enochian usage now. While there are some records of men trying to use Enochian in England in the 18th century, the first person about which we know much is Frederick Hockley. His work seems to inform that of the original Order of the Golden Dawn, who weave rather high-level Enochian into their initiatory rituals. How that happened is not something we know, though it is a fun mystery to explore, and one Terry and Vincent speculated about at length in the introduction to the Ophanic Revelation. Terry also explored some of those gaps in her 2010 essay, A Golden Storm, which is still available online. When we get far enough into the book, into the course, that you're ready to look at the Great Table of Earth, we will look at the mystery of the Golden Dawn cipher manuscript, which in effect jumpstarts Enochian in the modern era, though it uses only part of the system. That means that you find several approaches to Enochian. There is a purist approach that uses only things that come directly from D. and Kelly. The problems with this, in our opinion, are twofold. First, many purists do not take into account how D and Kelly would have set up their temple energetically as well as physically, and how that made communication possible. And second, it ignores all of the valuable additions people since then have come up with. There's also a strictly Golden Dawn approach, which, again, ignores everything anyone has learned outside of the Golden Dawn, and pointedly ignores the work of Aleister Crowley. There's a Thelemic approach, which focuses mainly upon the work of Crowley, but neglects to consider how his personal imbalances or excesses might have distorted the system, even as he pushed certain ideas far ahead of others. Then there are people like ourselves who feel that, like Vincent Bridges and Dan Winter, and like Crowley, Florence Farr, and some others from Thelemic and Golden Dawn backgrounds, that we are all working with the same current. We use what has come before, but not all of it, because not every innovation is useful. So, how does one sort it out? One thing that helped us immensely was noticing that none of these earlier systems, not one, actually answered the question of who Dee and Kelly were talking to, and what the very communication itself says about the higher consciousnesses they were conversing with. The fact that the beings could come through at all points out most obviously that they had consciousnesses and technologies far beyond ours. What was a miracle then, we might explain today via concepts like quantum non-locality, the concept that consciousness from any place in the universe can communicate almost instantaneously with any other place. We have the concept, yes, and understanding that there are many beings in the multiverse who are far more evolved than we. And by now, our Dharma has totally pushed aside our dogma. Yes, the communication is miraculous in one sense, but the miracle may be that higher consciousness has come to the aid of we humans before we destroy ourselves and the planet. We're at a time and place in history where it's fair to ask how that communication occurred and what cosmology informs it. Dean Kelly's Conversations with Angels is by its very existence transdimensional and non-local, and might be better explained by concepts like quantum non-locality than by religious revelation. Could Dee and Kelly's angels simply be ETs who answered Dee's call because the angels saw a future of humanity that had endangered humans and themselves? They wanted to talk to someone, and these two guys were listening? That could very well be the case. Archangels, by definition, are not of this world. By the time you have your installation up and running, you will want to talk a lot more about cosmology and want to know your thoughts about it as well. We consider the Enochian installation a consciousness-assisted technology, much like that discussed among people involved in the different CE5, or Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, or human-initiated ET encounter enterprises. The major difference is that we are creating with angelic or ET help, the consciousness-assisted technology here with their instructions, rather than meditating and hoping they appear to us by using their technology on the other end. Also, to be fair, any magic circle or sphere could be considered the same thing. Anytime you invoke or evoke and succeed, you are working with phenomena in a way we can now physically describe. Viewing things this way also introduces a new and helpful twist to the problem of Enochian as a language, as we'll explore later on. Does that mean the Ophanic beings or angels or their mediators will talk to you? If you set up your temple space correctly, of course they might. Ask them for help. They want us to evolve, not destroy ourselves. Transdimensional beings have been among us for eons, and talking to them is really nothing new. Your Enochian installation is a refinement upon one of humanity's oldest spiritual practices, connecting heaven and earth, and it is quite a refinement. You will be working with higher intelligences from an installation which serves as your personal alchemical chamber, where the language and technology are one. Why would these transdimensional beings care whether or not we humans, the killer monkeys, if some have described this, evolve rather than destroy ourselves? If you are approaching this from within a religious faith, you probably believe in or have experienced higher beings whose job, so to speak, is to care. We are simply a lower emanation of what they are. We are all, at a certain level of understanding, part of the same one. Those of us here on Earth all live under the same sky, and beyond it are the vast reaches of the cosmos. Even the speed of our electronics is no match for the instant connections possible with higher technology and consciousness. If we were traveling to Earth from Proxima Centauri, the nearest star, and traveled at the speed of light, it would take 4.25 light years to get here. Anything that is talking to humans in real time must have highly sophisticated transdimensional technology and have explored consciousness itself as a technology. It is truly the realm of angels. For several generations now, this view has also been expressed by those at the cutting edge of pure science. As science fiction writer Arthur Clarke wrote in 1962, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. An idea he also explored in novels such as Childhood's End. Yet, because we tend to think of science as non-spiritual, we often fail to explore what cutting-edge science, especially quantum theory, tells us about our own connections to the source and to each other. Of course, those who have led the way often make mistakes. Those who have been at the vanguard of quantum theory often exhibit the same moral failings as the spiritual leaders of many faiths, who have repeatedly been in the news for taking mental and physical advantage of their young charges. Consider the case of Austrian-Irish physicist Erwin Schrödinger, whose work in quantum theory included the famous Schrödinger equation, which provides a way to calculate a system's wave function and its dynamic changes over time. Fascinated by consciousness and a student of Vedanta, Schrödinger is famous for saying that the total number of minds in the universe seem to be one. We are not, at some level, separate beings, and what affects one of us affects all of us. Yet even as Schrödinger's science and his spiritual practice led him to that view, he at the same time was a pedophile who molested many girls, recording his many conquests in a diary named Ephemeridae, after an order of insects, mayflies, with ephemeral adult lifespans. The most brilliant and dull among us desperately need to integrate the disparate parts of their psyches and evolve. It's simply a matter of realizing we can be better than we are, and what helps one helps us all. Expanding your mind to the cosmos is only part of the equation. How we run our personal energy and maintain balance and a loving heart is the rest of it. Sexuality and the management of sexual energy is one way many people short circuit, but far from the only way. As we rev up our overall energy, most of us need to balance out those related to survival and sexuality so that we, killer monkeys, stop the rape of the planet. As we open to our higher mind, we become aware of how we can make this world and ourselves in it better. You will find that Enochian work helps raise what some have called Kundalini energy. Integrating that into your practice can be a beautiful thing, as beautiful and healing as predatory behavior is harming. That's not an exaggeration, but simply a fact. We are now in a critical time in human evolution. That brings us to another charge we often hear about Enochian. Many people, even Donald Tyson, who considered Dean Kelly's Enochian the greatest single spiritual artifact in Western magical history, have commented that Enochian is apocalyptic. For years, we have answered that with a joke. Of course, Enochian is apocalyptic. We're living in the apocalypse. What do we mean by that? Well, just look at the word itself. Apocalypse comes from ancient Greek apokalypsis, meaning to uncover or to unveil. An apocalypse is a time of unveiling all that has been veiled. On the one hand, the average person has access to a previously unheard of amount of information. That has been unveiled. On the other hand, never in human history has there been such a gap between the richest and poorest, and never have we had so much technology that makes us work harder and harder instead of life being easier. It has been unveiled, but only for profit. Gaia herself, the consciousness of Earth, grieves. Climate change is wrecking the planet, and it's not so slow anymore. All that and more has been unveiled, and the acceleration will continue through our lifetime. If we go to the source, we see that we are doing this to ourselves, and not only to ourselves of one religion, race, or even of one planet or one solar system. Many people involved with CE5 work have noted that public flying saucer or UFO or UAP sightings seemed to spike after the atomic bombs were dropped in World War II. Others have commented that it seemed some ETs were able to temporarily turn off nuclear silos at a distance, and it seemed they did so as a warning. It could be that there are quantum effects of actions such as splitting the atom in places very far from here. We do not know the quantum effects of nuclear explosions, but we do know that there are more than a few reports of ET concern about this, as collected by groups like the Disclosure Project. Think of Enochian magic as a tool to help humans to evolve before we destroy ourselves. Dee and Kelly were living at the dawn of an age that has included nonstop warfare and justified indigenous genocide as discovery. We submit that any higher intelligence watching the planet, be they archangels or ETs or both, could see the destructive path humanity was on. As you go to the source and develop your spiritual abilities, you may, as a side benefit, develop talents such as clairvoyance or remote viewing, which the Vedic practitioners call siddhis. And it's worth noting that, via remote viewing, one can see probabilities in the future as well as events in the past. Most who do this see that our best future as a species requires a total paradigm shift in how we view the cosmos and ourselves in it. It's a safe bet that the higher consciousnesses Dee and Kelly talked to, simply because those beings were able to communicate to two humans at all, were capable of understanding the fabric of consciousness far better than we are. Their communication, by definition, had to be transdimensional. Enochian, as a spiritually assisted or consciousness assisted technology, was one advanced enough that it has taken multiple lifespans to develop. The work started by Dee and Kelly was, in a sense, passed on to people in several later time periods. In the case of Dee and Kelly, one can pinpoint exactly the place where they developed the system as far as they could and were able to go no farther. Later, others went farther, and the time to use this magical system on a larger scale is now. As you will discover if you work through the system, if you line up the Enochian Great Table of Earth to the stars, it aligns the best now, not 400 years ago. We're happy to share our personal stories of contact at a later time, but for now we will just add that this is not merely theoretical with us any more than it was with Vincent. The idea that Enochian was a gift to humanity to help us evolve before we did irreparable damage to ourselves and the planet was the premise of Vincent Bridges and Dan Winter's Enochian Lifeboat project in the 1990s and early 2000s. And it is still our premise today. Outside of the conventional history taught in most schools, many people talk of the earlier fall of great Earth civilizations. The Book of Enoch tells a version of that story, as do many indigenous legends. Plato in the Timaeus refers to perhaps the most famous of these civilizations, giving it the name Atlantis, and in the same work writes of long Earth cycles, which some now call the Platonic Great Year, and of some time in the future when those longer cycles will align with shorter ones. We now know that one Platonic Great Year equals 25,920 smaller 365-day years. Only the center we count from is the center of the galaxy rather than the sun. There are other long count calendrical systems based on other transits, particularly the transit of the planet Venus. Many ancient cultures from around the globe, among them the ancient Chinese, Egyptian, Proto-European, and Mayan, revered the priests who kept the calendar and set the schedule for yearly rituals based upon their observation of the stars. Implicit in such practice is the importance of connecting to stellar energies. We want to embody the qualities of the stars. Within Earth's spiritual traditions, from Taoism to Tibetan Buddhism to Zoroastrianism, is the concept of the human as the bridge between heaven and earth. One might simply notice how the language a person is using shapes the perception, slightly, but not enough to miss a meaning focused upon the stars. For instance, most English speakers will recognize this as the first line of the Lord's Prayer: Our Father, who art in heaven. Yet, as George Lamsa, who translated the Bible from Aramaic, was fond of pointing out, that line could just easily be as translated as Our Father in the sky, or Our Creator who is throughout the universe. Whether you consider that Creator a being like Metatron, God, the energy that precedes the Big Bang, the Ein Sof Aur, the center of the galaxy, some overlap of all these, or if you simply call it the source, you will find that connection and that reaching for and through the stars extremely valuable in your study of Enochian.